If you're trying to understand how Finland's asylum and refugee laws work in 2025, you've come to the right place. This is your go-to guide, breaking down the key laws, recent changes, and what you absolutely need to know. Think of this as your cheat sheet for navigating the Finnish asylum system. So, let's start with the basics. How do you actually apply for asylum in Finland? You can do it right when you enter the country, whether that's at a border crossing, an airport, or a seaport. You can also apply from inside Finland, for instance, by contacting the police. The Finnish Immigration Service, known as Migri, is the authority that handles your application. A crucial point here is that even if you arrive without a valid visa or travel documents, you can still apply for asylum. This is an important part of the international system Finland has traditionally followed. Now, let's get into the legal stuff. The primary law governing all of this is Finland's Aliens Act. This act saw some significant amendments in September 2024, and these changes are having a big impact on how things work now. In 2025, one of the biggest changes is the introduction of a new border procedure, which is also called an accelerated procedure. This new process is designed to review certain asylum applications much more quickly, especially those that the authorities believe are likely to be unfounded. If your application gets put into this accelerated procedure, you can expect a decision very fast, within just 4 weeks. However, there's a trade-off. During this time, your freedom of movement might be restricted. For example, you may be required to stay within a specific reception center while your case is being reviewed. This is a major shift from how things were done before, where the process could take much longer but offer more freedom. These changes didn't happen in a vacuum. Finland has been facing increased migration pressures, particularly at its eastern border with Russia. In response, the government introduced some temporary but very significant restrictions. A law was passed in mid-2024, and it has been extended to the end of 2026. This law gives border authorities the power to deny asylum applications immediately, right at the border, under specific circumstances. So, what does this mean in practice? In certain border zones, especially the eastern border, asylum seekers might be turned away without their application even being heard. And in many of these cases, there might not be a right to appeal the decision. There are exceptions for particularly vulnerable groups, like children or people with disabilities, whose situations may still be evaluated. But for many others, the door might be closed before they even get a chance to make their case. As a direct result of these measures, the number of asylum applications in Finland dropped sharply in late 2024 and into 2025. As you can imagine, these new rules have sparked a lot of debate. Human rights organizations, including the UNHCR and Amnesty International, have raised serious concerns. They've questioned whether these measures comply with international refugee law, especially the principle of non-refoulement. That's the fundamental rule that says a person cannot be returned to a country where they would face serious threats to their life or freedom. The debate is ongoing, but for anyone trying to seek asylum in Finland right now, this is the reality on the ground. Now, let's talk about what happens if your application is successful. If you are granted asylum and receive refugee status, or if you're given subsidiary protection, you get a residence permit. But here too, recent law changes from 2025 have altered the landscape. First, the initial permit periods have been shortened. A residence permit granted on the basis of refugee status is now valid for 3 years, down from 4 years previously. If you receive subsidiary protection, the change is even more significant. The initial permit is now for just 1 year. After that, you can apply for renewals, which are typically granted for 2 years at a time. This is a change from the longer permits that were issued before. The goal seems to be to review protection statuses more frequently. There are also tighter rules about keeping your status. A person can now lose their refugee or protection status if they commit a serious crime. We're talking about very severe offenses, like war crimes, crimes against humanity, or other serious non-political crimes. This is part of a broader trend to link immigration status more closely with public order and security. On the flip side, When might an asylum application be denied or rejected? There are several key reasons. First, under the new system, your application could be deemed inadmissible or unfounded through that fast-track border or accelerated procedure we talked about earlier. If the authorities quickly decide your case has no merit, it will be rejected. Another major reason for denial is if the applicant is considered a threat to public order or national security. This has become an even more prominent factor with the 2025 amendments. And as we just discussed, even if you are granted protection, you can lose it later if you commit a very serious offense. The standards for both getting and keeping protection have definitely become stricter. It is also important to know that applying for asylum directly at the border isn't the only path to protection in Finland. There are other routes. For example, Finland has what's called a quota refugee program. Through this program, Finland accepts a certain number of refugees each year who are nominated by the UNHCR, the UN Refugee Agency. The selection for this program is based on a person's need for protection, the conditions in their country of origin, or the country where they first sought asylum, and Finland's capacity to help them integrate. This is a completely separate process from the individual asylum applications made at the border. It's a planned resettlement program, not an emergency asylum procedure. Another important category is subsidiary protection. This is for people who might not meet the strict legal definition of a refugee under the Geneva Convention, but who would still face a serious risk of harm if they were returned to their home country. As we've covered, the residence permits for subsidiary protection are now shorter under the new laws, starting with a 1-year permit. So let's put it all together. What are the key takeaways for anyone considering applying for asylum in Finland in 2025? First and foremost, be aware of the new border law. If you arrive at certain borders, like the eastern border with Russia, you could be turned away immediately before your application is even registered. This is a major hurdle that didn't exist in the same way before. Second, if your application is accepted for processing but is put into the new border or accelerated procedure, you need to be prepared for a very quick process. A decision will likely come within 4 weeks. The downside is that you might have limited freedom of movement during this period, likely being required to stay at a reception center. Third, if you are granted protection, understand that the residence permits are now generally shorter. A refugee status permit is for 3 years, and a subsidiary protection permit is for 1 year initially. This means that achieving long-term stability in Finland will likely require renewing your permit and continuing to meet the conditions for protection. Finally, remember that the quota resettlement program is a different beast entirely. It is managed through the UNHCR and is separate from the asylum process you initiate yourself at the border. If you are already in a refugee camp or registered with UNHCR in another country, this might be a potential path, but it's not one you can apply for directly from inside Finland. The landscape of asylum in Finland has changed dramatically. It's become faster in some ways, but also much stricter, with more hurdles at the border and shorter-term security for those who are granted protection. Understanding these new rules is absolutely essential for anyone navigating this complex system. I hope this guide has given you a clear and helpful overview of the situation as it stands today. Thanks for watching, and be sure to subscribe for more updates.